talk during it. Hooray! All right, I'm going to turn off the light so this might be easier to see, hopefully. So, let's first start off by talking about the interface of what we're going to be doing. Okay, so when I use Procreate, really the first thing that you have to start with is your canvas, right? Just like when you're opening a sketchbook, how big is the piece of paper? What does it look like? So we're going to hit the plus sign. And you can usually start with pretty much anything, screen size, square, whatever you really want. I'm going to start with screen size because it's the size of my screen. Voila, right? Now, with Procreate, we have a few different user interface items. At the top, we have our gallery, which takes us back to the main screen. We have our settings button. This is where we can do a lot of the important mechanical things. Bring a photo in, send a photo out, make animations happen. Who knows, right? This is where you're going to find a lot of that stuff. This includes making it right-handed or left-handed, whether you want to show the brush cursor when you're brushing, and whether or not you want a light interface or a dark interface, right? Lots of really nice accessibility things like that that are great. We have our adjustments tab, but this is what I like to call the fun glitter tab that I will get to a little later. We have our selections tab. This is where you can select things. And then we have our little movement mouse, but currently I haven't drawn anything, so the little mouse button here isn't actually going to do anything. Now, on the other side, on the right-hand side of our interface, we have our brush menu. Look at all of the brushes. We have our smudge tool. Guess what? Smudges are brushes as well. Do you want to smudge with your finger? Do you want to smudge with an oil paint brush? We have our erasers. Oh my gosh, erasers are also brushes. This is a great thing. And then we have our layers tab. We work with layers a lot in digital stuff, but I'm going to be honest with you. I tend to flatten a lot of layers so that I can smudge my colors together a little bit more easily depending on what it is I'm working on, right? I'll break down a little bit how I like to organize layers later on, but for now, you can kind of just consider it like you have one layer. It can be a sketch layer or it can be a painting layer, whatever you want. Now, let's say I have like an orange circle and I have on a different layer a blue circle, right? Whatever. We have these two circles now. If I wanted to treat this like Photoshop and use blend modes, all I have to do is click the little N next to the layer name up here, right? This opens up my opacity and my blend modes. So I can do all sorts of fun stuff with blend modes to take advantage of what things look like and try to show something as specific as I want, right? You can also swipe to the left and you get a chance to lock, duplicate, or delete. Or you could swipe to the right, or excuse me, not swipe to the right, click on the right, and then we've got all these options for renaming the layer, masking, referencing things, whatever you want, right? At the end, I can swipe again, and I can clear to delete things. I can also, taking a look at my background color, change my background color to whatever I want until it reaches a point where I'm happy with it, right? So this is our general interface, right? But that's not necessarily how we always want to get started. When I'm working on a piece and I know that it's for a client, this is going to be a final piece, what are the first things I'm going to think about? Resolution, color mode, stuff like that. Are my pixels going to show up the way I want them to? The way we're going to do this is you can go to your Actions tab, select Canvas, and hit Crop and Resize. This is where we get our little settings and we can change not only the exact pixels on either side of the dimension, but also our DPI, dots per inch. This is going to allow it to actually change the resolution so that when you export this, it doesn't have any weird pixelations to it. It's not lower resolution than you want it to be. But you can also just crop, wiggle it around just like you would in any other program. Then we can hit done, and it crops it for us. Hooray. Now, let's pick, I don't know, like a pretty neutral, inoffensive background color. Sure. Now, what do I want to do if I'm painting from a reference? My favorite thing to do is to simply lightly pull up and then hold one of my things and just pull it up to the side. And then from here, I can take this little adorable picture of Sweet Baby Ray sitting in a sunbeam and just zoom it up right next to my image, right? Yes, this was this morning. He loves to sleep right in the beam, right? So let's take an example of this. Let's say I wanted to draw Sweet Baby Ray right now. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my brush panel and I'm going to find a good brush for sketching. So I'm going to go down to sketching. And we have a lot of different examples here. I usually like the 6B pencil. I'm also going to bring my background color up just a little bit so that if I sketch in black, it's not going to be too hard to see on the darker purple background. Now, when I start drawing, often I'll do exactly what I do in figure drawing. I'm gonna like measure up some lines next to Sweet Baby. See where he is, right? Map him out. Knowing what I know about this image, he's kind of a square, essentially, right? So I've got my square mapped out. That's kind of all I need to know in this part of it. If I think, oh no, it's a little small, I'll hit my mouse click thing. Just gonna increase it a little bit, right? Give myself an area to work in. Next, I'm gonna looks like his head is about halfway down his body. So I'll map in the head here. Got some angles coming here. I'm really just trying to make it as accurate as I can for how he looks. And then once I've got really the roughest possible shapes together, right? Something I can do to make the paintings now come across, like this is the roughest shape in the world, right? That's okay. What I'm gonna do now is I'm going to make a new layer and I'm gonna switch to an oil brush. I shelled out for the Sargent's oil brushes. They're like $13 online. Oh my God, I will never use other brushes again. I love them. Singer Sargent is a brand of oil paints and brushes, and their digital brushes are amazing. But regardless, I don't want to color pick from the image on my screen, right? If I,
Are those for both Photoshop and for,
Oh yeah, they have them for Photoshop too, yeah. Yeah, Singer. Or is it Singer Sargent? Maybe it's just called Sargent's Oils now, but either way, these are my personal favorites.
Did you say $13 or $13 like a month?
Oh God, no, $13 once.
$13 a month.
No. No, I don't do subscriptions unless they lead me to reality TV. But anyway, one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to pick from the image, right? If I color pick from the image, I'm basically saying, that's my palette and I'm allowed to use nothing else. Because if you start using stuff that's outside of the picture, now your color scheme is going to be super out of context. So instead what I like to do is I actually kind of put my eye up to a circle of my finger and just try to really look over my subject. What colors am I seeing here, right? So I'm gonna just start playing with the colors I see and putting big, massive, chunky colors on my palette. So this is the palest color of Sweet Baby. Maybe this is the white of his ears. There's that little tiny hot pink area in his ears. So I'm gonna include just a little palette of that. And then for the darker areas, it's almost like a cool brownish gray for some of them. Like a burnt yeah, like a... All right, so that's getting there. That's about the color palette I want-ish, right? Maybe adding a little bit more high saturation orange in there to give him that little tabby cat feel. Yeah. Now, I've got my palette worked out. What else? Now I'm just gonna start taking directly from my palette and just sort of like blocking in our really basic shapes here, right? So we've got his little paw, his little other paw. And you can leave as much open or closed as you want. It really doesn't matter. But slowly but surely, you will start to see the shape actually take form. But at the end of the day, it's really just a matter of carefully color picking from vision, not from the source photo, but from what you're seeing. Got like some lumpy fur. Lumpy buddy. Now I know that as his fur goes back into space here, it gets a little bit, like as things recede, they get a little lower saturation, they get a little lighter in value. That's what atmospheric perspective does. So can we do this to the kitty, even just subtly, to give us a sense of that depth? Maybe even bringing more cool grays and purples into the mix. And just sort of starting to block in as much as you can. Oh, that ear is not right. Hold on. Okay, so super basic shape and form. Doesn't look good yet, right? Not supposed to. At this point, I can now turn off my sketch layer, and I have a little bit more to work with. Still doesn't look great though. Now I'm gonna take my smudge brush, and I think something important about this is I actually do use my oil brushes for smudging, right? Part of this is because when I smudge with an oil brush, I can really push in a specific direction. Whereas in comparison, if I smudge with the default, which is like an airbrush, no matter how close I get or how small I get, it's just kind of gonna get a little bit muddy. It's going to get a little bit soft, which is what it's designed to do. But if you want to use your smudging as a way to push your paints around like I do, then you may actually want to use an oil-based smudger. Or an oil painting type brush type smudger thing. So now from here, if I see errors with proportion, like I basically chopped off the back of his head, I can now fix those issues without judgment for myself. And like the cool thing is too, with the smudge brush, like we can see I'm leaving behind a lot of stuff, but that's okay. Because I'm going to correct it soon enough anyway. So I'm just sort of adding in chunks and then blending those chunks. Add a chunk, blend a chunk. Now eventually, after doing this for a long time, eventually you'll be like, whoa, it's starting to look like a cat. That's amazing. If you want to at that point, you can go back in with contour lines and start to add in little details, right? So I might want to give Sweet Baby a little bit of a better ear situation. I could come in with my line work and do this. And this is now going to give me a better opportunity to flesh out the details of his little face. Oh, someone is sad. All right, so again, not amazing, but we're getting there. It's getting there slowly. So we're just trying to kind of pick out what the biggest, darkest values are. Lay them on in big shapes. Take the biggest highlights, lay those on in big shapes. Smudge them around together. See what you need to actually force into one shape and not. For example, if we look at the triangle behind Sweet Baby's ear, right? We've got this beautiful little shadow shape, but if I blended that perfectly, it would really get lost. I want to keep the triangle, but still make it feel just smudged enough that it fits with the whole piece. I might be working too small. I know, someone's like so sad. Either someone's sad or someone's pretending to be a ghost now. Either way. Sad ghost. I'll also come back with my erasers. Just clean up some of these edges that aren't quite working the way I want them to. We can also start coming back in with rim lights. So let's say we want a big, beautiful, like blue background light coming in from behind him. Maybe what we can do is take some sort of beautiful green light or blue light. Yeah, because he's orange, so that's gonna look weird. Some sort of beautiful blue light and add it right at the tips of where that light would be hitting him, in theory. Just to start adding in a little bit more color. Bringing in just little bits to start to accentuate the little details, right? And then, let's think about it. If this were a purple floor, so let's add in a layer for the background now, right? Let's say this is a wooden purple floor, and we're gonna add the sunbeam in a little bit on top of them. So if this is a wooden purple floor, something I wanna think about is Ray is sitting on the floor. It's semi-reflective. It's going to reflect his light a little bit, right? Because he's got a bright orange fur. What hue, color, value, saturation do we want to show the light of orange floor hitting off of a dark purple floor? Yeah, orange fur hitting purple floor. What do we feel like that color would be?
Gonna end up hitting kind of neutral, right?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be like a weird, like a brownish, like really thinking in our brain, like orange light, purple surface, grayish beige reflected light maybe. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna move it a little bit warmer and move it a little bit lighter. And then we'll just sort of try it out. Maybe a little lighter. Boom. Love it. We also know that we have that that bluey rim light hitting in the back. So let's add a little bit of like a light lavender over here, maybe. Now, the last thing I want to do to give that like sunbeam effect is I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm just going to paint white right across it, right? This is where our blend modes come in. We can do a lot of neat stuff using blend modes that allow it to look like the light is really passing through Du Bois. And so if I wanted to, then I could come back in and erase around some of these sections to give it that like kitty hitting in the light kind of vibe. You know what I mean? The nice thing too is that I can go back in at any point and spice any of this stuff up. Now, one thing that a lot of people love to do at this point, though, is, okay, well, what if I want to add some effects? These are all in different layers. This is why what I like to do is group things together, duplicate the group, and flatten it. This way, you have a copy with layers that you could go back to, but you can still work with it as though it's one single painting, which for any of you like me who really love traditional painting stuff, feels a lot more natural. I'm going to group these by swiping to select all of them, and then I can hit group. I can close that group, swipe to the other side, and duplicate. I'm going to hide my back one, and I am going to rename it Backup Layers. Yay. And then for this one, I can just click on the icon of the group and flatten it. And now it is a beautiful flattened layer that I can do whatever I want with. I can also go ahead and erase my palette because I don't need it anymore. All right. Now, this is like kind of a gnarly looking picture of a kitty, but that's okay. In the meantime, if I wanted to take this image and just give it some spice, right? This is where our adjustments panel comes in. I love the adjustments panel. You can go to hue, saturation, brightness, and change the hue, saturation, or brightness of the image, right? But let's say you only wanted to do that with a portion of the image. You can actually change this from layer to pencil, and now only the things that I brush are changed by this. So if I wanted to make just his face a little bit more green, this is an amazing way to do that. If anybody here has ever painted someone and you're like, oh no, the skin on their hands is like a little bit too warm and it doesn't match their face, or like, oh, it's a little bit too this one undertone and it's implying a symptom, you can always come into hue, saturation, brightness, mess with those layers. It's amazing.
So in Photoshop, would you like lasso select something?
Not necessarily, but I'll show you how I would do it in Photoshop when we get into the Photoshop part.
Oh.
But with color balance, it's the same thing. The idea is that you are picking from your shadows what colors you would like to emphasize more. Maybe you want your cool tones to be really, really cool. Your mid-tones could be more warm. Your highlights could be like super hot pink if you want to. So color balance allows you to really, really intentionally mess with stuff like that. Curves is almost the same thing. The idea is that you are taking the lightest light and increasing it, or the darkest dark and decreasing it. In this case, what this graph usually means is this is the darkest dark in your piece. This is the lightest light in your piece. If you move this down, it means that the lightest light in your piece now is at a darker starting point no matter what, right? So this says, as it goes from light to dark in your piece, and as it goes from light to dark on the screen, if I change this by bringing it down, the lightest lights become darker no matter what. If I bring this one up, the darkest darks become lighter no matter what, right? So there may be some cases where you paint something and you're like, this is just in general a little too dark. If you pull up the curves and make it all just a little bit lighter, you can then go over with a contour that makes it feel super, super planned. For gradient maps, this is just a neat little way to force yourself into a limited color palette. A gradient map takes that idea of the darkest darks and lightest lights from curves and just makes it so that, okay, like for Breeze, your black colors are going to be navy blue. Your medium gray colors are going to be like that greenish teal. And your lightest colors are going to be that yellowy color, right? That's what a gradient map does, is it just simplifies your value scale based on how you set it here. Gaussian blur is a way for us to blur the image. Motion blur is a way to blur the image in a way that's like that Mr. Krabs meme. You know what I'm talking about? Money. Perspective blur is just like a different type of motion blur, but you just move. Oh yeah, sorry, that's gonna mess with a lot of people's brains. Sorry about that. Now we have some more of the fun ones down here. You can play with these on your own if you want to. Noise just adds a level of noise to the things that are painted on the screen. Bloom and chromatic aberration are the two that I see overused everywhere because they're fun. Bloom allows you to take your lightest lights and make them a little glowier, right? This could mean pumping up the actual volume of bloom all the way. It could mean changing these little settings here. Glow cat. But the general idea, hello, is that your bloom is really there. Like, look at that. Glowy cat, not glowy cat. Glowy cat, not glowy cat. The idea is really you're just trying to imply a sense of glowing or light or illumination from those areas. And then chromatic aberration is it's basically Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse's aesthetic of, or like the TikTok logo. The idea is that if it moves, you have the red and the blue side by side. That's what chromatic aberration is. So if you want to add it into your pieces, throw it in there. But I have to admit, I just take such an issue with pieces that overuse chromatic aberration. To me, it's just like, it just looks like motion sickness. Whatever. A lot of people use it to just sort of imply like a sense of fun and modernity and like it's contemporary and vaporwavy or whatever. But yeah. Now, the last tool in this, arguably the most important tool, is the Liquify tool. There's a version of this in Photoshop as well. The idea of the Liquify tool is that it's a way to take anything in your piece and change it however you want. And that sounds like it is super overwhelming, and it kind of is. I'm going to take my size brush and pick up anything I want. Ball kitty, who knows, right? The idea of Liquify is that I can make anything I want to better than it was before, right? So if I wanted to, for example, make let me see here. Let's say I wanted to make a tendon. This is actually a terrible example because it's shown in the video this week. But anything that is like repeated or stretched over a period of time, something you may want to do, like let's say it's like a ribbon or something. You may want to have like a bunch of different, like, I don't know, the ribbon would look like, kind of look different over the fabric of it. Maybe it's like a ligament. It's got a bunch of different tones in there. Whatever. Then I can kind of smooth it out with my smudger brush to make it look all nice, right? If I needed to do like a foot of that would be impossible, right? I'd have to keep my arms so straight and so smooth for so long. But what I could do instead is use Liquify and literally just stretch it. Just stretch it as much as I want to. Why not? And now I could do all sorts of stuff with this. You could do cellular textures. You could do anything because you literally just pull. It's amazing. So Liquify is super, super good, not only for fixing proportion, but for allowing yourself to create textures that you couldn't normally make using just regular painting stuff, right? This allows you to take something and really, really stretch it. But let me see if I can find a good example. For example, with like these sketches, for example, if I decided, oh no, her eyes don't look like that, right? Her eyes are too close together here. This doesn't give me a good likeness of Kim. What I can do is I can go to wherever my Kim layer is, and I'm gonna flatten it just for this purpose. And I can take my liquify tool, bring it really far down in size. I don't want it to be too big. And just slowly but surely move it a little bit out. And now she looks like a completely different, terrifying person. Okay, but yeah, the idea being that this is your way to push and shove things around, right? Now again, when it comes to painting stuff, here's another example of that like palette technique, right? You wanna look at your source image, you wanna look at each color on there, trying to kind of solo or silo out the individual colors you're seeing. But again, avoid color picking directly from the image because your eyes are gonna see so much more beauty than the eyedropper will. The eyedropper is only gonna find grays. You can find a lot more color by looking at things with your eyeballs, right? So, like with something like this, I really go around and I pick through the colors I think I'm gonna use, block them in super, super flat shapes, and then go in with my smudging tool where I need to. But knowing that Liquify is there to allow you to push things around is huge, right? Now, the point at which you decide to use line versus deciding to use color is really up to you. But the general idea here is that you're gonna treat it exactly like you would treat any other kind of painting with thinking about the forms and the shapes you're looking at. Now, that's the Procreate side of things. Let's dive into Photoshop. Now, I am going to be using the iPad app for Photoshop, but it's the same thing. It's all the same. Like, the UI is slightly different, but you'll be able to find everything the same way.
Quick Procreate question. So I know when you make the canvas bigger, it gives you less layers.
Yes, and that's because of the size of the file, right? What it's basically saying is if you want a file that is 3 by 4 inches, but like a billion DPI, it's gonna be like, okay, you can maybe have a layer because even though it's small, the resolution is huge, right? So like I can't do it. It's too much. I can't have any layers because it's so high resolution. So if you get like, oh, there are not enough layers for me, decrease the resolution or work in a separate file, basically.
Okay, so can you like decrease the resolution and then make your thing and then compress your layers and then make the resolution bigger again, or would that mess it up?
It would kind of mess it up because the problem is that you'd have to shrink the resolution, and then when you expand it back again, all those pixels that it shrunk, those are gone. So all the pixels that are left are just going to kind of look at each other and go, uh-oh, we got to get big again. Do you remember what color went over here last time? So like that's a big part of it. It's like if I were you, I would just think about dividing your assets into different like Procreate files if that's kind of the issue you're butting into. But honestly, if it's coming up to a point where you're like, my one file can't take that many layers, maybe think about not having as many layers or reduce the overall size. You know what I mean? Like the inches, the aspect ratio itself.
How compatible is Procreate with Photoshop?
I would say very. Yeah, I just move things back and forth. And that's what I'm going to get to at the end, too, is how you get stuff out of these things. Why am I not still logged into this? I was logged into this like 2 hours ago. Oh, it's because of UIC's Wi-Fi.
Children? Yes. Sam, are you still going to use the same?
Yes.
Also, I left my laptop charger at my
Oh,
house,
yeah,
so
go
I'm gonna
ahead.
fetch it
Oh,
real
yeah,
quick.
go ahead.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll be right back. Thank you.
Oh, of what they're doing.
They know that we're here.
Should we just all wave?
Yeah, say hi. Wave to them.
So sweet.
They're so bundles.
Oh my god.
They seem like it.
They're hilarious.
They're so cute.
super hype.
Hey girl, hey girl. This is hysterical. Okay. Anyway, that's amazing. Okay.
I love the one in the snowsuit. It's like a full-on snowsuit. She's like standing in the sun. She's like,
Amazing.
oh my god, Stan, 7,000.
Me? Oh, it's my fiance. He's logged in.
Oh, okay.
I actually have I have do not disturb turned on all the time on my iPad because if I get emails while I'm painting, I'm no longer painting. Come on, Photoshop. I feel like that's what I say to Photoshop all the time.
Yeah, you got this.
Come on, Photoshop. Okay, so just like with regular old Photoshop, we have our general user interface here. We can say create new. And it's going to ask us what we want to create. I'm going to go just a general print and maybe like a letter. The nice thing about Photoshop is that it doesn't tell you like Procreate, make art at whatever size you want. And then when you export it, it's going to be lower resolution than you wanted. Photoshop says right off the bat what size do you want it, what resolution do you want it. So we're going to change it to, actually, no, we're not going to change it because it's perfect. Color mode, do you want RGB? Do you want CMYK? What do you want? I think you can actually just change that later, but regardless. And then you can change the title of it. So, Test Ray. Sure. And then we'll hit create. Hooray. Stop it. I don't care. Okay, anyway, let's take a look at, again, just the regular interface of Photoshop on the iPad. Move it, Ray. So, just like we do on regular PC Photoshop, we have a left column and a right column. In the left column, we have our select tool. This can select individual layers or items on the screen. We have our brush tool, our select tool, the transform tool, which allows you to like do different kinds of stuff. And these are our real 4 main items. Again, this is used to move stuff around. The second one is used to actually distort or transform things. So if you need to size stuff, if you need to change the frame of things around. This one is used to select things, right? If I wanted to select something on the screen. And then this is our brush. Now with our brush, deselect. With our brush, we can hit the tiny little triangle. And this is also where you can see where you can add ABRs, brush files. It's the exact same brush file that they use for Procreate. So you just buy it once and then it's usable for all of them. But you can add brush files. What are we gonna do now? Let's go ahead and just start practicing painting some stuff. So I'm gonna pick a really basic regular color. Change my brush size with this little number. I can use this to invert the foreground and background. And I can just start painting in my screen. Woohoo. We've got our undo buttons up in the upper corner there, but you can also use gestures, 2 taps with 2 fingers to undo. And then, of course, we have our eraser brush as well. Just like with Procreate, you can select the brush that you want to erase. So you really are using your intention to make everything, right? We have our clone tools, which I'll explain what that means in a second, because it's one of the things that makes Photoshop objectively more powerful than programs like Procreate. Procreate is amazing in that it lets you paint really organically and feel like you're painting organically again, but it doesn't necessarily have all of the photo editing and image manipulation capabilities that Photoshop has had for years, you know? Underneath here, we have dodge, burn, sponge, and smudge. And then underneath that, we have paint bucket and gradient, right? Now, if I just go to my regular paintbrush and I'm gonna put down like some purple colors. what do these 4 things do? What does dodge do? Burn, smudge, and sponge. Dodge is going to lighten it. But is that all it does? Let's see. We can also change the hardness of the brush. We can change the exposure, which means basically just like the intensity. And with the little settings tab here, we can change just how intensely it does it. So with dodge, you can see that as I'm painting over this, it's getting lighter and lighter. If I change the range setting to shadow, it doesn't get quite as light. Whereas if I change the range setting to highlights, it doesn't get quite as light, but you can see it getting intensely saturated and get this like weird little white rim, which may be what you want for certain types of textures, right? What about the burn tool? It's the opposite. Yay. So we've got just general, it burns, it makes it a little bit darker. But if
it has to be on the same layer to do.
yes, it's like a brush on this object basically. So the brush is brushing on this layer, if that makes sense.
It does.
Now if I change burn to shadows, it does about the same thing. If I change burn to highlights, it's desaturating and it's darkening at the same time, right? So that's the difference between dodge and burn. Dodge is going to increase value, and depending on whether you're working on shadows or highlights, it will increase or decrease saturation. Burn, the opposite.
Could you do a clean mask? Would that work
For
the burn?
oh yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah, for sure.
So that's the main layer. Okay.
The
You could do non-destructive dodge burn.
yeah.
Okay.
Now with sponge is all about desaturate, resaturate. We can say, okay, desaturate my image. Let's say I just went way too ham with the skin tones and my portrait looks like blue and green and purple. Can come back in with desaturate, pull that down a little bit. If I did the opposite, I want to increase it, I can go to saturate. And woohoo. Look at me go. And then lastly, our smudge tool. Just give me a big one. There we go. And this is where we have our little smudgy. Now here's the thing about the Photoshop smudge tool. It's terrible. I hate it. I don't like the Photoshop smudge tool. It seems to be bad at it. I don't know how else to explain it, but it's not my favorite thing in the world. Instead, what we can do is use the mixer brushes. Let me see if I can find.
Yeah. It's still smudging.
Oh God, yeah, there he goes.
Kyle's paint box.
Oh yeah, those brushes too. Where did they just recently changed the interface on this, so I have to find like one more teeny weeny setting. But that's one way of rendering it that way. Other ways though include really just like selecting from the colors you have in here. And if I want it lighter or darker, I'm gonna make it lighter or darker, and I'm gonna brush in the way that I want to, right? Ooh, what does the animator pencil do? Okay, it's getting distracted. Oil brush, I'm gonna click on this to increase my size. And a lot of it can just be literally decreasing the opacity or the flow of my brush. If I decrease the flow, maybe I can like add more of that value in where I want to anyway, right? Now, this is all a test. In the meantime, actually, before I get to the Ray version, let's take a look at the right-hand UI. We have our Layers tab. This allows us to add more layers, add an adjustment group, add in photos, add in files, anything you need. We can see a bigger version of our Layouts tab here where we actually see each of the layers stacked next to each other, and you can turn them on and off. We have layer properties. When a layer is selected, you can then change any of the blending properties about it. No, just normal. And then we can add new layers here. Again, adjustment layers, whatever we need. easy turn it on and off, easy make a mask, easy do whatever you want, right? It also gives you a bunch of dimensions, effects. Yeah, I didn't think that effects were. But you can also do some stuff like select subject, remove background, things that photo editors will really commonly use for, let's say for graphic design. You have a stock photo that you bought of someone like, but you don't want like their background. You just want it to be like a big purple shape or something. Bring it into Photoshop, remove the background. You own that stock photo. Do what you want with it now, right? So that is one way of kind of looking at how we organize Photoshop stuff. I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to turn off our first layer because I don't want it there anymore. I'm also going to take my paint bucket, and I'm just going to fill the background color here with like this bluey color that I picked before, or maybe like a slightly lighter one. Now let's go ahead and add my reference photo back. Nope, Photoshop. Meh. Kitty cat. Meow. All right, so I've got my new layer here. I've got all this set up. What do I want to do to start? I'm going to start really the same way that I started with the Procreate one. I'm going to start with my sketch. So I'm going to pull a good color for sketching. I'm going to lower my brush size, and I'm going to pick a I think I'm going to go Animator pencil, maybe? Meh, there we go. Okay. All right, so I've got my pencil. Let's go ahead and start blocking this in. I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to measure them out. Ooh, this is like a really dark pencil. I'm going to lower the opacity of this by hitting the 3 dots. And, oh, can I do that? Yeah, flow. Oh, use pressure for opacity. Use pressure for size. They added that in. Blammo. Oh, I love that. Okay, that feels a lot more like a normal pencil. So, I'm going to take this. We're going to bring over some of those measurement lines. Kind of block in some of the basic shapes. We've got head, neck, feetsies, lumpy butt. There we go. Now, when I'm sketching, I do really like to just sort of block out those first shapes for myself, right? So as I'm going through this, I'm really gonna like do a decent amount of hatching and cross-hatching that kind of plans out how I want to approach the colors as well. I also will often use lines, like hatching lines, in the direction of the muscle or the plane that I'm seeing, right? So if I see his little feetsies going like this, I'm going to kind of try to draw hatching lines in there that echo that movement, right? All right, now for colors. I'm gonna add another new layer. Wabam, fantastic. And I'm gonna do the same thing as before. I'm gonna build my palette by taking my brushes. I'm gonna change to more of an oil paint. Now, with the painting stuff, I recommend not using pressure for opacity with painting. When you use pressure for size, it means that you can really carefully make it so that, oh, my brush is going to be tiny when I'm not using as much pressure, and then when it gets big, it's when I'm using a lot of pressure. When you do that with opacity, it gets a little bit harder to control, right? So if I'm trying to, for example, kind of use an opaque brush, or excuse me, a transparent brush to map out this orange, it's a lot harder to like get it actually covered up. And what's probably going to happen is that before I get it covered up, my brain is going to go, lizard, great, it looks perfect, move on, right? I won't actually realize that that's still super gray because of the lavender that's in the background. So I highly recommend sticking with brushes that don't use pressure for opacity so that you can just focus on getting that big color and the big shape in, right? But again, a lot of that is going to be a lot darker than that. So we're just going to pull our colors a little bit left and right. Make our bigger shapes. Wow. I made them too ketchup-y, but that's okay. It's too pink in this case. But regardless, okay, now if I wanted to do the liquefy trick with this, can I still do this? What I'm going to do is I'm going to, actually, I thought, where did it go? Womp, womp, womp. Okay, I could have sworn you were able to do it. I'm really irritated with Photoshop on the iPad right now. But in Photoshop, it's literally just layers, liquefy. And then it lets you liquefy that layer. Now, the cooler part in Photoshop, and I do actually show this in one of the videos this week, the cooler part about liquefy in Photoshop is that it allows you to see transparently the layers behind it. So if you want to liquefy something and have the area that you're liquefying only be like half opacity so that you can see what's underneath it at the same time, Photoshop allows you to do that, which is really, really cool. That being said, you could just take that layer, make it half opacity, and then just liquefy it regularly. It doesn't really matter at that point. Regardless, though, the biggest thing to take away from here is that whatever you could do in Procreate, you could do in Photoshop. Not necessarily the other way around, though. Let's say if I were to, let's say I actually brought in this photo, this little photo of Ray, or let's see here, here's some of my reference photos. Do I have anything on here that's like texture-y? I'll take this like sim. This is a Sims screenshot that I've been using for, I had to download a bunch of mods for the Sims to do different types of weight training because it's all like bariatric exercise, and normal Sim exercise is real dumb looking. So, and like this is, I actually have this Sim in pink is just singing. I just had her stand next to him and sing something so that it would look like she's talking to him. But regardless, let's say I wanted to make it so that this floor, like let's say I wanted to get rid of the dude and I wanted to have the floor continue. What could I potentially do to make that happen? Oh, oops, it took it away. Come back.
Sims for reference photos?
Yeah.
That's
All the time, literally. And the reason for that, though, is because I can get stock photos for hero images of people that I really like as references or use my own references, and then I just build Sims that look like them and move them around and have them do stuff however I want to. It's great, too, because then I can name them and I can feel like an identity for them. You know what I mean? But yeah, in terms of purely like lighting and positioning, this is so much easier than imagining it for myself. But regardless, how would I make this man disappear? In Photoshop, I told you about this magical little Band-Aid tool. I can open up the Band-Aid tool, and we have a few different things in here. Spot healing, and the clone stamp. The clone stamp is the coolest one in terms of what it can do. If I take the little spotter here, the little tiny blue anchor in the upper left, I'm going to click it, and I'm going to find an area that I'm going to spot from. What this is going to do is it's going to say, okay, anything you paint is going to take in relation to that dot. So now, I don't know if you can see what the anchor point is doing also, but it's literally just taking where it was before and moving it, which is also part of the problem, right? So now I have to take my anchor point and move it like maybe over here. What are you? Oh. There we go. Womp womp. Maybe I just need to go back to it. I don't know why it's not doing it anymore. Maybe I didn't. Oh. No, it's on the other layer over here. I wasn't on the same layer anymore. I'm a dummy. It created a new layer based on that linked, and I can flatten them down if I want to now, but it wasn't doing it because I was literally still on the new layer that it created for me. So if I wanted to click this and convert that, I could click it and say add clipped adjustment. Oh wait, no, that's, sorry. Bum, 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 bum. Is it this one? Is it you? There we go. Okay, I had to double click on the blue thing. I was clicking it and it just wasn't working. Okay, so convert 2 layers, and now it converts it to a layer. Hurrah. So now I could hide that, and if I wanted to, I would only have the part that I created as a result of the clone stamp. So whatever was cloned becomes its new layer, and then you can move it around and adjust it however you want to. The cool thing about this is, like one example of using this, I had a friend who, she was saying basically like she had newborn photos of her child taken, but the photographer was like really weird and like wanted to include a bunch of props, and she didn't know how to say no. So included like a big like clock, but apparently in her culture, including a clock in a photo, especially with a new baby, is just like really bad luck, very ominous. She was like, I culturally, I don't want to send this to my parents. Can you Photoshop the clock out? Can you just like take the ground dirt texture and make the clock disappear? Yes, you can. With stuff like Clone Stamp, you could just take the texture that's underneath and add it over what's there. You may need to then smudge, add some things, tweak it to make it look real, but it's a really nice way for you to just get a sense of how to reuse parts of your textures. What else can you use this for? What if you didn't want to do like a whole ton of osseous bone or trabecular meshwork, right? For all of the tiny little textures and everything. Don't do that. Just repeat it. Use the Clone Stamp tool. Just make it bigger that way, right? This way you're working smarter, not harder, but you're also not forcing yourself to have to do the same things over and over and over again. Now, any questions up to this point? We're still going to go over like how we're going to export things and how you can work between the two of them.
How do you recommend file management?
Oh, my file management it depends on where you are. I think if you're on your desktop, using traditional file management in terms of just categorizing project by project and folder by folder.
Not file management, I mean layer management.
Oh,
I use
layer,
one word.
naming your layers as much as possible and grouping them into parent layers as much as you can. So like the way I did it with the Procreate one, where you group your base layers,
Yeah.
you could duplicate if you need to so that you do have that backup. But for me, I like working with flattened layers. I like feeling like,
Yeah.
you know, and don't get me wrong, if I move something and now there's nothing behind it because it's one layer, I'm going to get really annoyed with myself. So it is a matter of balancing when you choose to make it one layer versus not, or if you choose to do that at all, you know?
Yeah.
Have you used Adobe Fresco for iPad?
I have. I don't know. I couldn't figure out the UI in comparison to other things, and I gave up really quickly. So,
If you really like the live brushes because they have oil paint brushes, but then
Ooh.
when it stays wet on the layers, you can like blend it.
nice. Interesting. Ooh, very interesting. Okay.
I think you'd like it.
That's, yes.
They've changed it a lot since I started using it like that.
Okay. It could be that when I first, because I tried it like a while ago when it was first coming out, and I was like, this UI sucks. I'm not using it, but who knows? Other questions so far? All right, last thing, we're going to look at how we actually take these files out of here appropriately, right? I can publish and export as a quick export. I can change my file size and file quality. I can change whether I want it to be an optimized one. When you are exporting your files, generally, it's good to export them as a TIFF file because TIFFs are extremely high res. They are not lossy compression. They'll keep all the file types. You could also export it as a PSD so that you can then take it to your desktop if you wanted to. Open it up on there, not a problem. You could also convert it to a JPEG or a PNG. PNGs have transparency. JPEGs do not. But remember, too, that every time that I have sent a client a TIFF file, they've gone, what dead is? They have no idea how to open it. So if you're ever working with clients, it's a good idea to send them JPEGs for review. But TIFFs are good for us in terms of preserving the format and the color and all that good stuff.
Could you also go over, I know there's a way to like embed your information so that people are less likely.
Yes, I will go over that, but I'll go over that at a different point because it's easier to do that in Photoshop or Illustrator on the desktop. So I'll show you how to do that there.
Especially
Yeah.
for this upcoming project because it will be with like.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you, Sam.
I'm on the desktop version and I can't find the export for TIFF. I was wondering if
Oh, you should be able to just like save as.
save as. Oh, and it'll just automatically. Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Other questions?
If it's not save as, it might be save as a copy.
You can non-save as.
I found TIFF at the bottom. Excellent.
Yeah, it'll be there for sure.
Okay, yeah.
All right. Okay. Now, once you've got your TIFF exported or whatever it is you want, your JPEG, yeah, add to my photos, whatever, dude. You can go back to home. You can see all of your stuff. Fantastic. So if I wanted to then take this, bring it back into Procreate, I could open up Procreate. Let's make a new thing. And once again, add, insert a photo. Wha-bam. It's my little Ray. Hooray. So now I can add new layers, I can add new other stuff, I can add new effects, I can do whatever I want. Really just working back and forth between the programs allows you to have that flexibility of what you want to work with.
Can't you also put in like a Photoshop file or a Procreate file, vice versa, and you can keep your layers?
Yes, you can. It's super convenient. So if you wanted to, you could say share as a PSD or a PDF, a JPEG, a PNG, or a TIFF, right? It's super cool. The other thing you could do is you could share the layers individually. Let's say you knew that you wanted each layer, but you wanted them separated out. And then you would like go into InDesign or something to do the graphic design. You just say export as layers, and it'll give you all of your images as individual layers with transparency and everything too.
So Sam, do you often work like starting in Photoshop and bring over to Procreate? Like, do you have an example of like maybe a piece that you've done where it's like
Oh yeah, for
final
sure.
touches in Procreate, but like
I think probably the biggest ones are like, and I'll have to find the actual like end example here, but this one was, let's see here. So you can kind of see, like, we have all of these little tiny like text pieces here. These were created in Photoshop and brought back in. This was originally made, or at least the paintings were made in Procreate. I brought the Procreate paintings into Photoshop, moved them around, added text, and then brought it back into Procreate so that for certain little things I could like erase away or like give a little gradient to the text or something like that.
Sam, could you show us, if you have it and you're willing, could you show us that Procreate file and just how you have your layers arranged?
Yeah, absolutely. And to show you too, like this is what I brought in after.
Yeah.
These are each of the individual elements, right?
So would you group elements together?
Kind
That's how
of.
you organize it, but then that way you still have your flat.
Yeah, so this is the original. And you can see it's very similar in terms of like how much is here. But I do think that like, especially like with the hero, I tried to keep everything as separated out as possible. Oh, this is like not even the flattened version. Yeah, because she's down here. So it's, I think honestly for this piece in particular, it was a matter of like, get this one area together, complete it, and then keep going. Does that kind of make sense?
That you divided it by areas, and I guess it's just because it's more of a mural, like.
And the thing is too, it's also like, I work on all of it all at once, but I'll like, it's kind of similar to how I'm doing the second take on this piece where like blood pressure guy up in the corner, you can barely see what's going on, right?
You can see the Sims translation, that's awesome.
I know, right? Now, like, don't get me wrong, one of the biggest things is making sure that it doesn't come off that way, but a lot of stuff like this, like, I'm just gonna kind of like repaint, redraw, make sure that it looks the way I want it to, and then add in anything else and maybe add in contour line to make it feel very easy to read. Contour line is helping me understand the shapes that I'm looking at more than anything, you know? But I think the biggest thing too is that these two were painted completely separately from references so that I get an identity there, so that I get like a person. And these two still aren't even done. She has been, ooh, but she and I have had many conversations about how her face looks. She's beautiful, but I feel like it's not right yet. But regardless, that's kind of how I'll approach something big like that. Now, in comparison, if we look at like Susie from The Bachelorette, for example, if I were to look at a time-lapse replay of like how I did this one, are you gonna, can you show it? Can you do it? Oh no, it freaked out. Procreate crashed. I'm sorry, Susie.
It's okay.
Can I do, oh. No, I don't think it likes it doing it. Here, I'm gonna stop recording my screen for now since the demo